ce point de presse avec l'honorable Steven Guilbeault et le ministre de l'Environnement et Changement climatique Canada et Jennifer Morgan, secrétaire d'État et envoyée spéciale de l'Allemande pour l'action climatique internationale. Hello and welcome to today's press conference with the Honorable Steven Guilbeault, Canada's Minister of the Environment and Climate Change, and Jennifer Morgan, Germany's State Secretary and Special Envoy for International Climate Action. J'aimerais tout d'abord souligner que je me situe aujourd'hui sur le territoire algonquin non cédé, mais aussi j'aimerais rappeler aux journalistes de bien vouloir identifier votre nom et votre média dans votre nom Zoom. I will begin by acknowledging that I'm coming to you today from unceded Algonquin territory. I would also like to remind reporters to please clearly include your name and your media outlet in your Zoom screen name. Je cède maintenant la parole au ministre Guilbeault. I will now turn the floor to Minister Guilbeault. Monsieur le ministre, la parole est à vous.
Merci. Thank you, Samantha. Welcome, everyone. Good day, good afternoon, good evening, perhaps. Very happy to have this opportunity to provide an update on the $100 billion goal that Jennifer and I, as well as Canada and Germany, have been working hard on for the last 3 years. Pour le Canada et l'Allemagne, faire progresser le financement contre la lutte au changement climatique est essentiel pour faire face à la crise climatique. Au cours des dernières années, particulièrement au cours des derniers mois, j'ai pu écouter des dizaines de représentants de pays du Sud nous parler des besoins qui augmentent de façon constante en matière d'impact des changements climatiques, d'adaptation au changement climatique. Over the last many years and more so over the last few months as co-facilitators to support the COP28 president, I've been listening and hearing from dozens and dozens of countries in the global south how the needs to face the impacts of climate change are ever growing. Garder l'objectif d'1,5 degré à portée de main requiert une mobilisation accrue de toutes les sources de financement, nationales, internationales, publiques et privées. Nous devons travailler ensemble pour financer les centaines de milliards nécessaires à la transition vers un monde carboneutre et respectueux de la nature. With this update, we continue to show our commitment towards meeting the $100 billion goal urgently and towards improving the quality and effectiveness of climate finance. We are today publishing a joint letter that takes talks of progress on this goal. We're including a spotlight on 4 action areas that were identified last year in the Climate Finance Delivery Plan Progress Report, which are adaptation finance, private finance mobilized, access, and finance from NDBs. We hope this will provide a clear picture of where we stand on the goal, but also what remains to be done. I will now turn over the floor to my friend and colleague, Jennifer Morgan.
Thank you so much, Steven Guilbeault, Minister Guilbeault, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. Thank you for joining. For Germany as well, obviously we know the importance over the years of climate finance, and therefore with Canada have been working to coordinate the contributor countries around this important goal of the 100 billion. And earlier today, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD, published a report showing that in 2021, climate finance contributors collectively provided and mobilized $89.6 billion in climate finance. And this is an important increase from 2020 when we delivered $83.3 billion in climate finance, and it exceeds the projections made by the OECD before COP26 in the context of the Climate Finance Delivery Plan led by Canada and Germany. We were also pleased to see the OECD Secretary General indicating that based on preliminary data for 2022, there is a likelihood that the goal was already met in 2022, and certainly was met in 2023. And this is further underpinned by the good increase of the reported climate finance by MDBs in 2022. We recognize that releasing concrete figures for 22 and 23 must happen as soon as possible. And generating robust data, though, we know that takes time, and it's very important from a transparency and an accountability perspective. And so along with all other contributors, we're committed to working with the OECD to enable the release of climate finance data in due course. This progress has been possible thanks to the concerted efforts by all climate finance contributors to raise ambition. And meeting the 100 billion goal was an important step forward, but as Steven Guilbeault said, it's clear that we cannot stop here. Further scaling up and improving climate finance will require coordinated efforts by a whole range of actors. Handing it back over to Minister Guilbeault.
Thank you, Jennifer. This is not just about the quantum of dollars spent. Earlier today, the OECD published 2 other reports on adaptation finance and private finance mobilized. The reports take stock of current challenges and provide recommendations to overcome these challenges. We will continue to assess and work to implement these recommendations, recognizing significant effort will be required for meaningful progress. So on adaptation, the OECD report, along with the UNEP's adaptation gap report, show we need to continue increasing our focus on adaptation finance. I am committed to continue to work with everyone so we collectively double our adaptation finance by 2025, in line with the Glasgow Climate Pact. We confirmed with contributors that all countries remain on track to meet their individual adaptation targets and commitments. Contributors are collectively prioritizing adaptation and climate finance programming. They're also continuing, in particular, to seek innovative ways to increase support for the most vulnerables. We expect a long-term trend of increasing adaptation finance to continue. Sur la question du financement privé, l'OCDE souligne également que nous devons en faire plus pour mobiliser le financement privé, ce qui sera, je l'espère, et sur quoi portera une partie des conversations à la COP28 à Dubaï. Nous devons trouver de quelle façon nous pouvons augmenter les montants de capitaux privés mobilisés par le financement public dans le cadre de la lutte au changement climatique, tout en réduisant le coût en capital pour les pays en développement. Nous savons que les besoins augmentent, c'est pourquoi nous devons saisir toutes les occasions de travailler en coopération avec l'ensemble des partenaires pour mobiliser ces ressources. Et nous poursuivrons le travail en ce sens, notamment en cherchant des possibilités de partenariats innovants. Je me suis engagé à faire progresser le financement privé car il permettra de puiser dans les ressources cruciales qui nous permettront d'apporter le soutien nécessaire à la réalisation des objectifs de l'accord de Paris. Jennifer, back over to you.
Thanks, Stephen. I mean, in addition to the action on adaptation and private finance, that was the 2 issues. The 2 others were the following: on access, which was incredibly important. And we heard a lot from developing countries on the importance of that. And I'm just back from the Pacific Island Forum, and I could tell you for SIDS and LDCs, this is actually a fundamental issue that needs particular attention, and we need to continue to work to break the barriers that prevent those who require support from accessing it. Since we published the progress report last year, various actors across the climate finance landscape have taken steps in the right direction. Progress is visible in improved and streamlined processes to access funding from large funds, such as the Green Climate Fund, where it was a real priority for us to have the new strategy, prioritize access, as well as through continued efforts from the task force on access. A major component of access relates to debt, as many of the most vulnerable recipients grapple with the debt burden challenges. To improve on this, we continue to identify ways and possible instruments such as grants and guarantees to not increase the debt burden any further. First, debt for climate swaps are being implemented. And as we look beyond the 100 billion goal, we will continue engaging with climate finance recipients and the broader contributor community to tackle access challenges, top priority. The second is on finance from MDBs. In addition to the steps taken by climate finance contributors, there is significant momentum on climate finance action in the MDB space. In 2022, MDBs surpassed their collective targets to 2025 on climate finance, adaptation finance, and private finance mobilized. And beyond this, the World Bank has recently adopted an updated vision statement, which emphasizes the need for a, quote, livable planet, and outlines steps to increase its lending capacity over the coming decades. So working to leverage these positive dynamics is an opportunity to catalyze substantial resources towards progress on climate, and it is clear that MDBs are prioritizing climate more than ever before. But we will continue advocating for tangible, rapid progress from MDBs on the climate front, including through ongoing reform efforts. Back over to you, Steven.
Thank you, Jennifer. And I really want to conclude by thanking you and the German team who've done some amazing work over the course of the last 3 years to enable us to be where we are and really working to mobilize countries, the contributor countries to this effort, talking to NDBs and other stakeholders. I also want to thank the OECD as well for their support to all developed countries. COP28 president asked us to support him in demonstrating progress on the $100 billion earlier this year. So we are encouraged by this update. Nous sommes impatients de collaborer avec nos partenaires dans les pays en développement et d'échanger davantage avec eux sur cette mise en situation. Mais bien entendu, il faut continuer à faire du progrès. Ça s'applique tant pour l'objectif du 100 milliards de dollars, mais également pour fournir des clarifications importantes sur l'avenir du financement de la lutte contre les changements climatiques, dont le nouvel objectif chiffré collectif qui sera décidé à la COP29. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Samantha, back over to you.
Thank you, Minister Guilbeault and State Secretary Morgan. This ends the live stream. Ceci met fin à la diffusion en direct. Merci beaucoup, le ministère et le secrétaire d'État Morgan prenant maintenant vos questions. Avant de débuter la période de questions aux journalistes présents parmi nous, veuillez s'il vous plaît inclure votre nom et votre média dans votre nom Zoom afin de simplifier ma tâche à temps d'être modératrice. En raison de constraintes de temps, veuillez vous limiter à une question et à une relance. Si vous avez une question, veuillez utiliser la fonction main levée. Les combinaisons de touches suivantes peuvent être utilisées sur votre clavier de numérotation. Étoile 6, couper, rétablir le son. Étoile 9, lever la main. Thank you, Minister Guilbeault and State Secretary Morgan. We'll now take your questions. Before we begin the question period, I would encourage reporters to please include your name and your outlet in your Zoom screen, name to identify your role as moderator. In the interest of time, please limit yourself to one question and one follow-up. If you have a question, please use the hand-raising function. The following commands can be entered into the DTMF tones using your phone's dial pad. *6, toggle mute, unmute. *9, raise your hand. Our first question is from Alex Ballingal, Toronto Star. Please go ahead, Alex.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I was just, I'm glad my name was in the thing. I was trying to figure out how to do that. Thank you very much. Question for Minister Guilbeault. Domestic political question to start off with. I'm sure you're aware of this impression that's out there that if Bill C-234 passes the Senate unamended, it will be another carbon price carve-out. And there's a question of whether or not you would accept that as the environment minister and potentially step down. So I'm wondering if you can clear the air on this impression that's in the political bubble right now. If that bill passes unamended, are you in a position where you would resign?
Alex, I'm glad you referred to the bubble, because I've been spending the week in the writing, and I can assure you no one is talking to me about that. But more seriously, I mean, obviously the Senate is able to make its own decision. It hasn't made a decision on that yet. We will see what decision the Senate comes to on this bill and act accordingly.
So if it passes and it is another exemption to the carbon price on farming fuels, will you resign as environment minister?
Again, you're asking me to comment on a hypothetical situation, which is always a very dangerous thing to do in politics. I would simply remind you what the Prime Minister said just a few weeks ago, that there would be no more carve-outs for carbon pricing in Canada.
Okay, the following question will be going to Rashida Pardikar. Please note your outlet, please.
Hi, can you hear me?
You can, thank you.
Hi, so I'm a freelance reporter. I'm from India. I wanted to know if the report would have clear distinctions between what is given as a loan, what is provided as a grant, and loans are at what rates. Would you have these classifications?
Jennifer, do you want to take this one?
Thanks for the question. We're just looking for the reference in the report. So there is indeed there is a chart, figure 3, in the report, which does outline the loans, grants, equity portions within the 100 billion that's been reported on. I don't think it goes into depth of the different rates on the loans, but you can see that it's around 40+% on loans, and then 20+ on the grant side of things. Yep, that's where we are.
And do you have country-wise classifications? Because the US obviously is an underperformer when it comes to climate finance. So would you have country-wise classifications?
Yeah, I think for that, we would recommend going to the OECD site on that. In Germany, I can just say we have met our contribution for the going to 6 billion by 2025, 3 years early on that. But please do look on the site. I don't have those details top of my head.
For the following question, we'll go to John Woodside. Please go ahead, John.
Thank you. And thank you both for answering our questions today. I'm just curious about this 100 billion commitment. With COP28 just around the corner, and climate finance so often being about building trust in the system too, and in the negotiations. I'd just be curious to hear your thoughts on what today's OECD reports, how you think these might affect the negotiations that we're going to be seeing in the next few weeks. That's a question for both of you.
Jennifer, perhaps I can start, and you may want to add other elements.
Please do.
Thank you, John. I mean, clearly, since 2020 and since the data showed that we had not met this goal, I have heard very loudly and very clearly from a number of representatives from the global south that this was this showed that countries like Canada and many others weren't serious in their support of developing countries in their efforts to tackle climate change. So I think having this information by the OECD and showing that we have met that goal is an important milestone. But that's what it is. It's a milestone. It doesn't solve all of our problems. I was in Copenhagen. You were too, Jennifer, and 100 billion sounded like so much money at the time, and we didn't know how. We had no idea how we would ever be able to mobilize it, and we've done it. great. But there's so much more that needs to be done, and we know that the conversation needs to shift. Okay, well, we have mobilized $100 billion. How do we mobilize $1 billion, $1 trillion? I mean, 10 times what we have, 15 times what we have mobilized now. So that's what our collective challenge is. But I think what the report shows, and it shows that we've made progress, and it points to what's working and also what's not working, and how do we need to course correct to ensure that we are able to mobilize more funds, that access is easier, that there's more grants than there's loans, especially for things like adaptation, for example. So I think it's a good basis for us to help move our work even further in Dubai at COP28.
Yeah, I mean, I would share those reflections. I think we all recognize that this was a commitment that was made that we had hoped to meet earlier. I think we hope that by having this kind of as a foundation, it can perhaps build some confidence on our commitment to work together with developing countries moving forward. And I think also the work done not only on the number, but also on the areas, for example, on access are so important. And also on the private sector, and hope that it can contribute to the conversation on the third goal of the Paris Agreement as we go into the global stocktake, on basically aligning financial flows with the goals of the Paris Agreement, how we make everything climate resilient, how we shift the funding into the solutions, renewables, energy efficiency, nature protection, et cetera, away from fossil fuels and unsustainable activities, Article 2.1c. And also, I think on the question of the new collective quantified goal, which is scheduled to be agreed next year, but really this year we need to be working through, okay, how do we approach that? Hopefully this can be a good foundation for that. So as Steven said, it doesn't solve everything, but we think it's a very important milestone. And the numbers are going up. The numbers are going up. And I think that's I hope that's a reassuring signal to our partners.
Okay, we'll continue to the next question by Fiona Harvey, The Guardian.
Hello, thank you very much. I wonder what impact this is going to have at COP28, because we've seen that the loss and damage talks have concluded. We've seen some hopeful things happening on the global stocktake. With this milestone now passed, are you more hopeful now of a good deal at COP28, and what will that look like now? Thank you.
Steven, should I start on that one? Is that
Please do.
So I think in fact, I mean, I think the work that countries have done on the loss and damage fund at TC5 and the ability of that group to transfer a clean text to the COP is a very important step. It was a top priority, I can say, for Germany, for the European Union, for Canada, I'm sure, as well. And can really, hopefully, I mean, delivering, operationalizing and moving forward on that fund as part of the broader mosaic in 1 year, I think is really reflects the urgency of the issue of now on the climate issue. And also, this milestone on the finance, hopefully can, I think, bring us to a COP where, it's so clear we have to do everything. We have to meet our finance goals. We have to put forward the loss and damage fund, but we also need to scale up mitigation. That if we don't have global emissions in these six years, really, that the 1.5 goal will be incredibly difficult to achieve. And the requirements on a loss and damage fund will be extraordinary. Therefore, really focused in on how we can come together around an energy transformation, a phase out of fossil fuels, a tripling of renewable energy, and a doubling of energy efficiency, nature protection goals, so that we can close the gap to 1.5 in the 2030 timeframe, but also be building for the next round of NDCs on economy-wide targets, et cetera. So I think these are hopefully good milestones or bases. But, we're not resting on our laurels. There's no complacency here. We are actively engaging every day in that, because there is so much at stake. We are listening carefully to our partners and allies, but we need to keep our eye on the ball on these issues, and also the adaptation one. But it all needs to come together.
Thank you, Fiona. I agree with everything that Jennifer has said. Certainly, seeing progress made on loss and damage is a key element of success at COP28. But also, we need positive forward-looking outcome on finance, which is obviously linked to loss and damage. We need to make progress on adaptation, on mitigation, as Jennifer rightly pointed out. I think some of us, I won't name anyone else than myself, but we're a bit disappointed by the lack of progress on mitigation last year in Egypt. So we are hoping to see more progress being made on that in Dubai. And I think on loss and damage and finance, I think we've seen, for example, at COP15, we agreed collectively that we wanted to mobilize $200 billion from all sources by 2030. We agreed to create a fund, and the Jeff has been doing tremendous work to have that fund up and running. Commitments by countries have already been made. The fund will be actually up and will be able to start dispersing money the beginning of 2024. So just over a year after COP15. So we can do these things. They're complicated, they're difficult, they're challenging, but I think we are showing that we can do them. And as you know, this exercise is largely based on our trust in each other to be able to do these things. So being able to show those milestones like we're doing today, I think goes a long way in helping build the necessary momentum we will need to deliver a successful outcome in Dubai.
Okay. Pardon me. Our next question will be from Krista Hesse, Global News. Go ahead, Krista.
Hello, this one is for Minister Guilbeault. Aside from climate finance and adaptation, what are your plans and priorities for the upcoming COP28 conference?
Thank you for that, Krista. A couple of things. Certainly, Canada's been very engaged for many years now on working with partners, whether they're countries, financial institutions, companies, to accelerate the phasing out of coal as rapidly as we can, because we know it is one of the key elements that we can act on quickly, where there are lots of alternatives, financially viable alternatives. We also will be continuing our work on international carbon pricing. We will have more good news to announce in Dubai on the Prime Minister's Global Carbon Pricing Challenge. Methane is also an area where Canada, with many partners, international partners, has been very involved. If we are collectively able to mobilize our resources around methane, we could shave off almost 1 degree Celsius of warming by 2100. And this is another area, I wouldn't call it a low-hanging fruit, but we have largely the solutions that we need to virtually eliminate methane emission, for example, from the oil and gas sector, from landfills. The solutions are there, and it's a matter of deploying them at pace and on scale. Canada's very happy to participate in the conversation that really started last year at COP27 on the phasing out of unabated fossil fuels. There was an agreement at the G7 on that this year. We're hoping to. I am confident we can make substantial progress on that in Dubai as well. So these are other elements that we will be focusing on. And obviously, how the linkages between climate and nature, and the implementation of the COP15 commitments, which are very closely linked to what we're doing on climate change.
Did you have a follow-up question? Okay, I think we're good. So our next question will be going to Davis Legree, iPolitics. Please go ahead.
Hi, thanks for taking my questions. Apologies, I have one more kind of Canada-centric question from Minister Guilbeault, just because I found your answer to my colleague's question kind of provocative. Your response and your refusal to state equivocally or unequivocally that you will not resign regardless of what happens to Bill C-234 implies that you're at least considering it, and your decision may be dependent on what happens in the Senate. Is that fair to say? If not, please correct me.
My apologies. I wasn't trying to be provocative. Not at all. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that we have to wait to see what the Senate will decide. I don't know what decision, how the vote will go in the Senate, and we'll have to see. And then how do we respond to that decision? So, you're asking me to formulate an answer on two hypotheticals. So first hypothetical. What will be the result of the vote in the Senate, number one, and number two, how will we respond to what we don't know what will be the result of the Senate vote? I guess what I'm saying is let's see what happens in the Senate, and let's see how things unfold. Okay, thanks.
However, I haven't learned my lesson, so I might ask you one more hypothetical, but you might be a little more open to it. I don't know. You've been very critical of Pierre Poilievre's climate plan, or as you allege, his lack of climate plan. But I was hoping you might be able to just put that into context. How would Canada's participation in COP28 look different in your eyes if Canada's delegation was being led by Conservative MPs? What do you think you are bringing to the table, and Liberals are bringing to the table that's distinct?
Let me illustrate, Davis. Jennifer would be familiar with that, but the international environmental movement, when there's a COP, will organize a daily event called Fossil of the Day Award, and global environmental NGOs award every day the fossil of the day to the country that has had the worst position on climate negotiations, and they do that throughout the COP. And at the end of the COP, there is a colossal fossil that's awarded to the country which has had the worst positions of the entire year of all the COP. And between 2006 and 2015, I guess 14, Canada won the colossal fossil, so the fossil of the year award 4 times, if memory serves me correctly. Could be 5, but at least 4. Since we've been in power in 2015, Canada has not received one single Fossil of the Day award, let alone a Fossil of the Year award by the international NGO community. I think it's hard for me to better illustrate what the difference is in comparison to what it used to be under the Harper government, and frankly, I think things would be even worse from a climate change perspective, as well as many other issues under a Pierre Poilievre government.
Okay, our next question will be going to Daniela Chiaretti, Valor Economico. Apologies if I said your name incorrectly.
Thank you. Thank you very much. No, you said perfectly. Thank you for taking my question. My question is about the OCDE report, and I would like to know if the hydrogen projects in developing countries are included in this 86 billion or the 100 billion, and if so, are they loans? Thank you very much.
Jennifer, I can take a first shot unless you want to go for it.
Go first. That's great.
So when you look at these reports from the OECD, they tend to be very macro. So they don't focus on specific projects, but they look at overall what's been happening in terms of mobilizing those $100 billion. They look at components, for example, such as public financing, private sector financing, multilateral institutions. As Jennifer was saying a little bit earlier in answer to another question, they'll give you a ratio of loans versus grants. So it's not a report where you will find what specific projects have been funded in specific countries.
I can just add in, I think the criteria really, it goes by according to the Rio markers, and those are around mitigation and adaptation. So, if hydrogen projects were to fit into the mitigation side of things, clearly, I think the thing to remember is that the loans versus grants question also has to do with where actually revenues could be generated versus something like adaptation where it's clearly not about that. So yeah, that's but these aren't country specific reports. Also, just to remind folks about that, it's looking across the board.
Do you have a follow-up question, Daniela? Please go ahead.
Yeah, no, thank you. Just a clarification. Is okay? I understand that the report doesn't have these kind of details. It's just to understand the project, the idea, because the $100 billion. Well, there is a problem of transparency on this data on the perspective of developing countries. And yeah, I was hearing that maybe hydrogen projects could be inside this amount of $100 billion, and they are being developed in developing countries to help the transition of rich countries. So yeah, I'd like to know if it looks a little bit odd if they are included. Yeah, thank you.
Maybe just quickly, I mean, from a couple things. I mean, I think certainly in the projects that Germany is involved in on hydrogen, on green hydrogen, there are the first goal of those projects with developing countries is for their own energy access and their own energy. That's our primary goal in those projects. The secondary goal could be to provide Germany with green hydrogen. So just to clarify that piece, for it also just to remind that these projects need to be, or the funding that's in the 100 billion is consistent with ODA. So and on the transparency side of things, two thoughts there, Daniela. One is, I think you can check in the project-specific reporting under the UNFCCC reporting system. That reporting system, we now have in the Paris Agreement, the enhanced transparency system that was finalized in 2018, and we're now starting to report under that new framework. So the reporting on finance is going to be enhanced substantially, and that will help us, everyone, get a clearer picture, which we understand and also are looking for.
Thank you, Jennifer. Perhaps I can talk a little bit about the Canadian experience. So right now we're at 40% grants, so we're not at 50%, but it's certainly a goal we're pursuing of grants versus loans. 80% of the money we provide has a gender lens attached to it to support women and women's led initiative. For the first time, we're seeing finance for Indigenous peoples. So I think what we're seeing is a diversification of projects that are being supported to better reflect the reality of the challenges on the ground in the global South. But I think I'll be the first one to recognize that there needs to be more progress made, certainly in terms of access, in terms of transparency, and I think what both Jennifer and I are committing to do is to continue to work to ensure that these things improve as rapidly as possible.
Our next question will be from John Anger, Bloomberg News. Go ahead, John.
Hi, thank you very much for the briefing. I was just wondering if either of you have a message to the US, given that they have repeatedly failed to stump up their climate finance promises, whether it's $3 billion under the Green Climate Fund or more recently the pledge by Biden to provide $11.4 billion annually by 2024. Obviously, they've got their own difficulties politically, but I was wondering if you had any thoughts on that. Thank you.
It's obviously from speaking to our U.S. counterpart, and certainly I've had numerous conversations with John Kerry and others in the U.S. It's certainly not for lack of trying by the Biden administration to be able to provide those funds to the global South and to the international community. As you rightly pointed out, John, the situation domestically in the U.S. and certainly in Congress is very challenging on this front. But what I can see is that they keep trying and they're not giving up, and that gives me a lot of hope.
And we're looking forward to their commitment for the replenishment of the Green Climate Fund as well. So that will be a good moment.
Please go ahead with any follow-ups, with the follow-up.
Yeah, just a quick follow-up on given that Jennifer Morgan mentioned the post-2025 climate goal. I mean, the OECD has said that $2.4 trillion will be needed from 2026 to 2030. What new tools have you identified that are needed to get to that level, given the struggles to get to 100 billion? Thank you.
I could start on that, Stephen. I think one area that we're very much digging into is that one of the problems and the challenges is the cost of capital in countries. I know, listening to President Ruto from Kenya often, who brings up this issue, it's 8 times higher in parts of Africa than in the European Union, for example, in the area of renewable energy. And so one area that we have been looking into with partners is that of guarantees, and in order to bring down that cost of capital. We're also looking really on the issue of the new collective quantified goal, seeing, okay, well, what are the needs and the priorities of developing countries, listening to that carefully. And of course, it's twofold. We also need to broaden out the donor base. We are basically within the system using a system that was created in 1992. The world is very different now. And we think that we need an updating, a modernization of the donor base, and that those that are currently working to be large players on the global stage, also, with that role also comes responsibility, whether that be countries in the Gulf region, whether that be China, whether that be others. So I think that's also a key piece, but we know that public money alone isn't going to be adequate. Therefore, the leveraging of the private sector and issues like guarantees, but also innovative sources. And I expect this year at the COP that there will be discussions on that, certainly in the context of the Loss and Damage Fund. The European Union has recently put out the idea of a kind of what's the right word? That the extra revenues from oil revenue that's come into companies, et cetera, that there should be some kind of levy on that. And that also that we can be looking at both aviation and the shipping industry. There's some proposals coming in there on innovative sources. So I think it's clear that the capital exists, the funding exists, the financing exists. It's about moving it into the right places, leveraging it, and that's the broader discussion that we need to see around the third Paris goal that we'll be negotiating moving forward. But public remains core. Germany remains committed, obviously. The European Union is the largest donor internationally, but we need more. Thanks.
Yeah, I agree with many things that Jennifer just said. I think, I mean, in many of our conversations over the last 3 years, one of the things that struck me in terms of the cost of capital for developing countries is it's obviously associated with risk. It can be technological risk, can be project-based risk, can be political risk, and I think it's clear that there's not enough public dollars out there to meet the needs, and we need to bring in private sector capital. And I think the way we do that is by using those public dollars to de-risk some of these projects, regardless of what the risks are. I think public sector is better placed to be able to help bringing private sector capital. And I think the NBBs obviously have an important role to play on that as well. So how do we deploy more capital? How do we ensure that the conditions are from a cost of capital point of view are more interesting for the global South, and how do we make it more accessible? Because that's another thing we've heard, especially from LDCs, AOSIS, access to capital is a real issue. So it means looking at governance of many of our international institutions and MDBs to facilitate the access to capital for many of these countries.
Okay, we're going to go to the next question from Sarah Snonhart, ENE News. Apologies if I missaid your name.
Thanks. It's Schoenhart. It's not as hard as it looks. Thank you for doing this. I just had a question. Even if the total amount was reached in 2022, that's still 2 years where it fell short. And there's still 2 years where the 100 billion will need to be delivered again. Is there a plan to make up any shortfall? I think developing countries would like to see that the total amount was delivered as though 100 billion had been delivered every year. So is there a plan for that?
Jennifer, do you want to go ahead?
Sure. I think, the goal is agreed to on an annual basis. There's no agreement that contributors will make up against the shortfall in past years. But I think what's really important is to see that the scenarios that are published in 2021 in the context of the delivery plan, it showed the likelihood that contributors would over-deliver on the 100 billion goal starting from 2023. So, and I think the positive news that we received today from the OECD reinforces that.
Yeah, I think that the analysis that the OECD has provided over the last few years would lead us to believe that on average, between 2020 and 2025, we will reach the $100 billion goals, per year. Well, over the time period, so not annually necessarily, because we didn't do it in 2021 and 2020 and 2021, but the information we have would lead us to believe that moving forward we will pass the $100 billion goal, so that on average for that period we will be able to meet $500 billion.
Did you have a follow-up question, Sarah?
I did not. Thank you.
Okay. The next question will be from Z and Lum Politico.
Hi, thank you for taking our questions today. So this is a question to you both. What new headwinds do you anticipate to face in the next round of climate financing? I'm curious if a potential Trump comeback or elections in Europe or recessionary concerns have come up in conversations as potential factors that could impact finance mobilization. So what new potential headwinds are on your mind currently?
I mean, there's always potential challenges ahead of us. I think what is encouraging, and when you look at the analysis year over year, is to see the trend that we're heading into. We thought that because of COVID, there would be a serious reduction in capital being mobilized, certainly by the private sector, or even the private sector. That happened to some extent, but it rebounded really quickly in 2022. And certainly the trend for adaptation finance as well. So, will there be bumps in the road moving forward? Of course. But I think what encourages me is to see the beyond that, the global mobilization that we are seeing.
Yeah, I mean, I think, the last couple of years also haven't been without significant headwinds. COVID, the Russian war of aggression, just to mention two. And I think despite those two, we are seeing this increase. We do have also the MDB reform that is underway. We have the Paris summit that President Macron recently convened. But it's clearly a dynamic situation, and perhaps more dynamic than more than a few years ago. But I was very pleased to see that, we're not only staying course, we're increasing in this context that we're in right now. And I think that's a recognition, both, of course, of the responsibility, but also that the climate impacts are happening. They are hitting the most vulnerable countries. And also we see more than ever this drive to go for renewable energy, to have, and the understanding that these strategies and policies that are needed for climate are also those that are needed for development. And so those things going hand in hand, I think, if we talk about trends, just looking at having been at the Africa Climate Summit and seeing the commitment there, and the link into the international financial reform, but also just wanting to drive to this much more stable future, I think will also be a positive in continuing this upward trend in the future.
Thank you. Yes, I do. Thank you very much. I've got to put on my Ottawa hat right now. So this one I'm throwing to Minister Guilbeault. I'd like to follow up on Alex's and Davis's earlier questions. So respecting your preference to not comment on a hypothetical, can you help us understand the different scenarios as you see them if Bill C-234 is passed, and how that will square with the government's pledge that there will be no more carve-outs?
I mean, I think people are reading a lot into the comment that I made. The Prime Minister said that there would be no more carve-outs. I take my marching orders from the Prime Minister of Canada as a cabinet minister. So the Prime Minister said there would be no more carve-outs. That's the scenario I'm working with. I love being environment minister. I mean, it's a dream job for me, and I have no intention of leaving the job anytime soon. Canadians may decide otherwise, obviously, in our democracy, but for the time being, I want to stay right where I am.
Okay. Apologies, there's no further time for questions today. This now concludes today's event. C'est ici la période des questions qui prend fin. Voilà qui conclut la rencontre aujourd'hui. Merci beaucoup. Thank you.
Merci, Samantha. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Merci. Vielen Dank.